All right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'll call the roll. Chair Stern,
Yes.
Harrison Grant Williams. Here. Ben Sorensen. Here. Christopher Furtick. Here. And Richard Weiss.
Yes.
Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the September 7th meeting minutes. Anyone have any comments?
I wasn't in them, so.
Right. Richard?
No comments.
Okay, Chris?
Move to approve.
Billy, I have one comment. There was a comment in me, which I don't believe is quite accurate. It was suggested that examples be brought back regarding how cities where their elected officials, I'm fine with that. Noting that there were rated possibilities. It said that I added that because there are staggered returns, there may be times in which city only has 2 elected officials, one in the office. And I don't think that was what the comment was.
Where are you?
Page 7, sorry, that thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraph down. Only because it's not that there's staggered returns, the commission gets seated as a whole. So that's my only.
So I didn't do the minutes, so I can't say what was said and what wasn't. But I can
Yeah, you can
go
just
back to
double check.
prototype, yeah, and have it. So are you moving to approve with that change or as amended or as is?
Well, what,
Or
okay, yes,
On page 6, second paragraph from the bottom. Section 101.75, subsection 40. I think I said that there is none. I think if I can see what I put together. So the 101.75.
so let's defer this for 1 month
okay,
and just relook at those 2 sections.
sure.
Harrison, you want to make a motion to just,
Motion to approve the minutes as amended.
defer?
I'm sorry. Correct. Motion to defer the minutes until you can correct those.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
The next item is the overview of the strong mayor versus other forms of government. And this is something back in January that was raised, I brought up that we needed to look at the various forms of government to make sure that the public understands the various forms of government. Because the city's operation is not really following the charter. Again, it's inconsistent because we have a commission manager form of government, which means we have a manager that's supposed to be responsive to 5 commissioners. So the conversation at that meeting back in January is, where are we going in the future? To bring it back into a clear understanding of what the charter says, which is commission form, or do we want to start exploring other forms of government? And at the last meeting, we discussed having various speakers, starting off with someone with the academia background who best can understand and give us a total overview. So with that, I'd like to introduce Peter Cruz. Peter's the executive director for the Leroy Collins Public Ethics Academy and associated with FAU, which is a great partner here in Broward, as well as Palm Beach. And he also serves on the Palm Beach Ethics Commission. So he has a clear understanding of how government is supposed to be operating in the sunshine and ethically correct in municipal and local government. And with that, Peter, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Charter Revision Board and staff. I'm happy to be here, happy that your chair asked that you come in and talk a little bit about forms of government, and this won't be a 2-hour lecture, if we're going to do that. So what I want to say is that I'm going to present you the overview of what academics and other city leaders over the years have put together as the templates for which you guys and your commission will decide what is right for the city of Fort Lauderdale. And fortunately, I don't have the answer. There is no the answer. It's what works here. And there are pluses and minuses to every option that I'm going to discuss tonight. But I have left with your chair a model of city charter developed by the National Civic League 9th edition, which you might want to use at some point as you get deeper into your deliberations. Various sections, about 85 pages. And anyway, so what we find when we look everywhere in the United States, we find 3 basic forms and some sub-hybrid versions of those forms. The mayor council form with 4 options I'm going to talk about briefly, the council manager form, and the commission form. Now you guys have a commission manager. Council is just a term for whoever the policymakers are when I'm discussing this. When we were first formed as a country, a weak mayor or a weak mayor strong council was a popular form of government because we were getting out of under a monarchy in England. And so that was popular as the country was very young and growing. However, the council manager form gained popularity in the late 19th and early 20th century. And today, the strong mayor council form and the council manager form are the 2 most common and recommended forms for local government. We talk first about the mayor council form, and there are variations: weak mayor, strong mayor, standard mayor, and the CAO model, chief administrative officer, which is something fairly new that both the ICMA and the National Civic League are putting into their model charters. Some of the obvious forms and weaknesses of the weak mayor are probably very well known to all of you. The weak mayor form of government usually is whoever's chair of the commission of the council at some period of time, and it rotates among all of the elected officials. There's usually a lack of veto power, lack of an ability to hire and fire personnel without the other commissioners agreeing to it. And there's not really a strong control over the budget or the budget process. As time has gone on, the weak mayors are form of government is really getting passe. However, there is one strong point about a weak mayor. It keeps the autocrat fear of sort of at bay. Because when we get to a strong mayor is as good as the strong mayor is. And I will just a quick aside here. I'm living in West Palm Beach. We've been through a charter change in the early 90s with help from FAU at the time. We went from a weak mayor to a strong mayor, and 3 strong mayors since then, our current mayor, Steve James, have been responsible and in place. And we're doing research now to see how much is causation. We have had a renaissance in our development in downtown West Palm Beach. Many of you may have been up there and seen that. We have major Fortune 100 companies that are now moving their headquarters to the city. Is that all because we had strong mayors? We don't know yet. But the first couple strong mayors cleared away years of neglect of our downtown city. And everyone's still very happy with a strong mayor form of government up there. Okay. Let me talk about strong mayor. Of course, in there are variations of this depending on what specifics are put in the charter. Usually that person can appoint and dismiss key personnel, can veto council or commission actions, initiate the budget process, and really remain substantially in control of the budget over the year. Structure of strong mayor provides sufficient power for the mayor to run the operations of the city. There's a single point of accountability, and the structured office offers the opportunity to build professionalism through the mayoral appointments of qualified personnel. However, on the flip side, the strong mayor may exacerbate partisanship and undermine professionalism depending upon who the mayor is, making political appointments instead of professional appointments, and dismissal if partisan wishes are not followed through. There is also no assurance that the strong mayor actually has the administrative ability to run a city. Again, the voters at the end make that decision. A hybrid of the weak and strong mayor is something that the literature calls the standard mayor council form. And its model is known for separated and distinct powers between the manager, the mayor, and the council that are enumerated in the charter. For example, the mayor may initiate the budget, but the council would have significant input into the final version. A mayor in this form may have veto power, but the council can override depending on the threshold needed. The mayor may have responsibility for appointing and dismissing personnel. Excuse me, but the city council could retain power to approve those decisions. So it's a check and balance system. This particular form tries to take the best of the strong and weak and diminish the downsides of both the strong and the weak. So there's no perfect version of that, but this newest model we call the Chief Administrative Officer or CAO model is that a mayor can and the council can appoint a Chief Administrative Officer that is this professionally trained person to oversee the daily operation of the city. Position serves at the pleasure of the mayor rather than the council. However, there are examples of the CAOs that serve pleasure of the council or the other way around. In either case, the CAO carries out administrative duties on behalf of the mayor. This isn't a city manager. This is a chief administrative officer, like a super chief of staff that oversees the operations of the city for the mayor. Okay, let me move on quickly to the council manager form. It's the most popular structure in the US among mid-sized cities, 25,000 to 250,000. And the council appoints the manager and then is given responsibility to run the city. The position usually becomes what we call a non-elected CEO for the community. The division of labor between the council and the manager is largely between the policy and the administration. Usually the city council cannot deal directly with city departments without going through the city manager. There is some debate in the literature about whether these kinds of city managers can fully get away from the policy-making role. Natural niche and creep happens when a manager stays for a very long time and the council people roll in and out through elections just by tenure and end up getting some misplaced policy-making power when the original charter did not actually call for that. Okay, and finally, I want to talk about the commission form, and that's not what is here in Fort Lauderdale or any other commission. This is an early holdover. There's still some cities that have that, where the actual elected commissioners are given sections of the city to run, and the departments report right to them. And then they all, commissioners, the council people, get together and then at the meeting, try to figure out what's going on. That is a rapidly going the way of the wind kind of approach, but some places in Vermont, the town hall meetings we hear about, that's where some of this background, where that particular form of city government is. So I have a lot more detail on these. I'm going to leave that with your chairs. You can actually look at all this, the pluses and minuses for each one here. But I wanted to go to Florida and look at what happens here in Florida and the US. And this is from the Florida League of Cities. And basically what you're going to see in the blue circles and the blue squares down here, that's the council manager form of government of the of 274 cities in Florida. About 66% have the council manager form. Less so strong mayor. And even less weak mayor. As the population goes up, you can hardly see this, but it's from 5,000 to over 60,000. Council manager stays fairly stable. And this is just Florida. And here the process, percent of municipal population with each form of government, by and large, the council manager form is the most popular. And cities with each, based on the number of commissioners, 5 commissioners strong, council manager form of government. And as the population goes up, stays relatively the same. Strong mayor is the orange part, doesn't change too much. But here I threw this in. This is Broward County, all the cities here. We have strong mayor in Plantation, strong mayor at Sea Ranch Lakes, and we have one official weak mayor, and that's Lazy Lake. Everybody else is council manager.
Like us, point.
However, when we look at the United States, and this is as of 2019, the ICMA has really the only data that we're able to get. Council manager, 40%. Strong mayor council, 38%. Commission and town meeting. Those are those two sort of fading out kinds of forms of government, very low. So if you look at the United States, strong mayor and council manager are almost neck and neck as the type of government. So that is a quick overview of the forms of government. And I really, if you have any specific questions now, I'd be happy to try to help. But if there are questions later on, certainly your chair can ask for more information. But I don't know if you guys are prepared really to think about all these options here. But realize that you guys and the voters in City of Fort Lauderdale are going to come up with what you need to make this city work. And it may actually be what you have now. But again, that's up to you to recommend, the commission to approve, and ultimately the voters to do that.
Richard, do you have a question?
I have a question. Are there any statistics that you're aware of? I mean, I understand the anecdotal story you told us about West Palm Beach, and that's interesting. I was wondering whether there are any statistics with regard to what gets accomplished, sort of major issues. What gets accomplished, economic development, corruption, profession. Are there any statistics at all comparing the council manager form of government to any of the strong mayor form of governments that you're aware of?
Well, I was going to say everything you mentioned, corruption, economic development, yes, those all happen. I'm on the ethics commission, so that all happens.
No, I'm asking for a comparison. whether
Well,
there's
not-
all of that in all of these form of governments. I'm just wondering whether one is statistically better.
I will look, but from what I've been able to tell, there is no peer-reviewed study. There are case histories, case studies. And at some point, we might be able to put it together in empirical research, but we don't have that yet.
Okay.
Fortunately, because that's a very good question. Because then you might have the answer if we could get those data.
And the other issue I would ask is, what do those cities have as far as criteria for the person to serve in those capacities? So in the past, the residency, the academic training, the degree, the certificate of certification to perform the position. Mayor, can they maintain an outside job, or do they have to, because we've had that discussion in the county for years, that if you're going to be the elected mayor, then you cannot have outside employment. So,
That's the same in West Palm Beach, strong mayor, but the commissioners have to have their stipend. Is
Right.
not, I have to.
I'm talking about from the mayor to the manager. And we've definitely seen a major difference in qualifications of managers from the past versus what we have today. And therefore, it's projected in the quality of the work product we see at the end of the day. And the whole grasp of behavior of, you have a commission, which is 5 people, and a manager that by charter is supposed to work for 5 people. So where is the standards to hold them to that degree? Where is the ethics, and does that come from the state or the ICMA or et cetera?
Well, we have a state commission on ethics, as you all know. Broward County is one of the few counties that were able, when we used to have home rule in the state, we have an independent group, inspector general. And we have an independent COE and an IG, 2 separate offices up there. That can't happen anymore under our current state of home rule in the state, or you can't go to the voters directly, you have to go through Tallahassee. But where's the enforcement? With it internally, your compliance officers here, if there is an outside organization, you're all subject to your county ethics ordinance in addition to the state, as are we in Palm Beach County, as they are in Miami-Dade. So those are the 3 big counties that got into this business earlier of enforcement for many reasons that we all know well, way too well. People behaving badly in the mid-2000s and beyond that. So there is, the charter itself is an ideal. If there's creep away from that and no one calls anyone on that, then you will have city government practically that operates one way and the charter says something very different. And the commission is where the buck stops, unless there's some violation that rises to an ethics violation or other kind of criminal violation potentially. But you can't, it's up to you being commissioners or city government people and the commissioners to say, this is the charter and this is what we choose to live by. But if you have the charter and you choose not to live by it, then the voters are the ultimate people to decide.
Our charter is very, very clear on the criteria. So
Right,
if it's
but-
not being abided by, which we know it's not being abided by, where does and the county chose not to put city manager within their charter, but city officials are within that charter. So their feelings was that there's a state governance versus local governance on that, but where do you really go? And that's the dilemma.
You're right, but of course, again, you write something down in it. I suppose you could put sanctions and penalties into your charter if you chose to do that. And then I don't know exactly who would start that process. If the commissioners chose not to do that, then where are we back where you were?
And I
a few
hope
minutes
you-
ago?
And I would hold the commission responsible for supporting violations of the charter versus living up to their own oath. Because when they take the oath of office, in that oath, they say they're upholding the charter.
When you go to the state attorney and ask them for an indictment, I don't see, I don't think you would find a state attorney willing to get involved unless there was
Right.
something egregious going on. It's up to the people who are elected to make this work and to make it work the right way. They choose not to do that, then only recourse is the voters eventually.
And educate the voters about the importance of the charter and those that don't comply with the charter and make them aware, they can vote how they choose.
Just one last thing, Benjamin Franklin, when he left the Constitutional Convention, said, "I'm giving you a republic, but it's up to you to keep it." Even the founders' system is only as good as the people in it. And there's no foolproof system.
Could we call upon you at different times to come back to us and Richard is our point person for working on agenda. So if there are different questions like Richard had before, and come back and share with us, as you know, if you can get that study as Richard was talking about and pull some of that information, that would be
I'd be
good for
happy
us.
to give you whatever background that is neutral. I like all these forms of government. They all have worked one place or another, all have their pluses and minuses. And I'll be happy to answer, specific questions, because I don't want to say, you
Right,
guys have to do this or you shouldn't do that. That's entirely up to you to figure out. But if you'd like the information, we'd be happy to do that for you.
Richard, would that be good for you? Is
That's fine.
doing some of that?
I think the trying to look at this with an open mind and without preconceptions, which I'm trying to do. All of these form of governments work with the right people in place, all of them. And if the wrong people are in place, then they don't work. And I think that the challenge is to try to figure out what gives our city the best chance of working. And that's why I was asking whether, one of these forms of
Question.
government has a better chance of success. Because there's wins and losses in every single form of government. You can point to great ones and poor ones, ethical ones, not ethical ones, people who got stuff done, people who didn't get stuff, all of that were in all form of government. So that's why I was asking the question about whether there's any actual data on this.
Well, Fort Lauderdale has not had a strong mayor, and yet it's a beautiful, well-developed international city. West Palm is all of those things. We had a strong mayor. So there are two different. City is ahead, certainly economically, both cities are doing well from my outside view. Anyway, for Fort Lauderdale, looks like it's great. Your buildings are getting big. We're almost getting all buildings, not quite as tall as you have. But you guys did very well with the current form of government structure here. We felt we had to change many years ago. So right there, we have two different forms that got pretty good outcomes.
And can they maintain outside employment in Palm Beach as the mayor?
No, the mayor does not, but the mayor is obviously separately elected, as strong mayors are, and has a salary that's around 200,000 a year plus other fringe benefits. And that was considered at the time an adequate salary to live on.
And the criteria, is there an outline of the criteria for the staffing that he chooses to have in place?
Yes, and they have chosen to follow it and chosen not to follow it, depending on circumstance of who the mayor was. It's,
Yes,
yes,
Ben?
if you're an at-will at the mayor's,
Yes.
beck and call, you know,
Peter, question, thanks for this. The council manager form, what do you see as downsides, some of the downsides to it?
I think the single biggest one, that I have seen, and of course, the talks about this, is that if the manager, same manager can have two different outcomes. The manager stays for a very long time, the council commissioners change. The manager gets, misplaced power by being there and having the infrastructure of the city. The downside, of course, is that as in some cities, there happens more up in Palm Beach County, Delray Beach, the mine specifically, where they went through 5 managers in 6 years. And at one point had the fire chief being an acting manager. That is the downside, is that the manager is too easily fired or too hard to be fired. And that's a downside. But those are extremes.
When,
Comparison.
yeah, when you think about, just to follow up that. Go ahead.
I didn't have a question.
And so we looked at the population, looking at the size of the city in correlation with type of government, so, which it seemed like heavy leaning towards the same. Any thought as you look of, 190,000, person city and so forth, when you get to these bigger size cities, does that impact when you think about?
Yes, actually, when you look at some of the detail, which I will share with the chair and she can get it out to all of you. Very small cities and very large cities have strong bands. And I don't quite get the small size reason. I get that big cities need a strong person to have power coalesce around to get things done. And is that always going necessary? No, but that is what seems to have happened just by default over the years. You have to think, there are some exceptions. We have metro forms of government, but we'll talk about those because that's not a situation here. But do you have, we have a county mayor in Palm Beach County. But that mayor is actually just the chair of the county commission. And that was just a name change. But in essence, that person is only a ceremonial person for 1 year at a time and signs things and runs the meetings. That's, you might know. But it depends on the city. If the city's in trouble, you probably need a strong mayor to get some things done. If you then had only a council manager for. If the city's doing very, very well, and you have strong commission leadership, depending on the term limit situation, commissioners might be able to do it with a good manager. So there are so many variables here, and that's why I've tried to make it as concise as I can. It really depends on what dynamics in the ground game is here in Broward County and in the city, obviously, because you are kind of see. And yeah, so I'm sorry, I sort of trailing off here, but I guess the big thing is to think about, why would you want to change what you have now? Is there a reason to change? And what is that reason? And then see which form might best suit that. You need to go to a strong mayor. You need just to have a better manager, not to disparage anybody who's here. But, or are you happy with everything? And back to your chair's point, if people are not following the charter, then that's maybe, is that a reason to change the charter, or is that a reason to change the people? And that's something you guys have to figure out.
Leanne?
Thank you. Yes, sorry, have you been able to do any analysis of those factors, corruption, et cetera, versus the number of commissioners? But we have a very limited number of commissioners here for, I view it, for a city of our size. And so it's very easy to get just a few people lined up to do a particular thing.
You're right, and one of those charts I have, it's hard to see from way back in the back of the room. It's depending upon the size of the Florida League of Cities has actually done research on that, and the house around 5 is where the council manager seems to be the strongest. When you get 7 to 9, it tends to go to strong mayor. And that's just based on what's happening here in Florida. They just did a count, say, well, how big is the city and what's the form of government? And they put it on this nice circle diagram here that actually your staff can actually send all of you. This gentleman right here had the slides, so but you have them too, so you can.
Yeah, we can send. I'll get to you, David. I think you have the slides as well.
Yeah, the Chair gave them to me, so I
Okay.
can provide them.
And that's, you will actually be able to read those when you see them on your screen. Now, that is just a statement of what is happening. That doesn't say, if we go into those cities and examine corruption rates. Those are very good things to know, but it's very hard to get that research together in a proper way, other than to do anecdotal or do case studies of certain one-off places. And those are generalizable as far as you want to be able to generalize it, but it's certainly not empirical research. It's peer reviewed the same way.
We've seen, when you have professional management at the top, as you said, you've seen the growth, and that's where we had our burst of economic development growth. And it was continuing on path, but that was professional management at the very top that led that with a mayor that had a very more global experience, because he had been Tallahassee as well as local, so he had more global outlook. So it definitely had an impact on the direction that we went. But then Harrison works over at the county, and he's had the south end of the county a lot in his district. So he has seen a Charlie Dodge in the city of Pembroke Pines versus a smaller city
How long has Charlie been there?
since.
Since incorporation?
So we all have different visions of what we've come up to. And Harrison, you most recently had the discussion again at the county level of changing. But again, you can expound upon that with your experience.
Honestly, I think that the biggest issue with the question of strong mayor, elected mayor, mayor with kind of an expanded role is just how much do you need one of the electeds to be able to unilaterally represent the municipality and or county to outside entities in terms of, we want to do this. I could sit down at the table and say, I agree with the thing that you are saying, we want to make this happen. Because when you have that very diffuse power, whether it's a ceremonial mayor like we do in Broward County as well, or you have, again, an administrator or manager who has been there for a very long time, they still have to communicate with the caveat, if I can get my fellow commissioners or if I can get the board to agree to this, this is a good idea. And I think that definitely creates some hesitation when it comes to big ideas and big execution. Otherwise, I think that you do have a situation where a lot of views get represented when you do have more commissioners. I think you have a little bit more of a not parochial so much as it's easier to get into the neighborhoods when the districts are a little bit more geographically compact. But yeah, I think that if we're using my place of employment as a model, I think we should keep it to the history and the experience of the city of Fort Lauderdale. I don't know that this is going to be helpful to.
Well, if I could just interject there, we two long-term women have run until recently here Virginia Baker in Palm Beach County and Bertha Henry here. And they both had very similar career paths. And, but I did see in both watching previous, before you were like probably out of high school, I was there watching, but that over time, the commissioners were deferring more and more to the manager, the administrator. And that office grew in very, very powerful ways that I'm not sure that the commission originally envisioned, but there wasn't any argument that I could see going on.
To quote Stephen Popeil, a very long time aide to 7 different county commissioners, when power walks down the hall, it never comes back. So you're right. And again, I think that the benefit to having more powers in the hands of the mayor is that if we believe that the next life chapter of the city of Fort Lauderdale requires an individual to be able to take a greater lead in running the ball, or use your sport metaphor of choice. That's basically where you have the value added. Otherwise, again, if you want more balance,
And
put in more
Richard,
hands.
you and Richard both have the experience with the city of Weston, which is probably the most unique city in the county. And Richard, were you there from the inception?
I was, I wrote the charter for Weston, and basically it was a council manager form of government, a traditional council manager form of government. The only thing that was really unique about Weston was, as opposed to hiring all the employees, they basically hired 2 large consulting companies, 3 really. They hired Calvin Giuliano to do part of it. They hired another company to do, Moyer and Company, who ran special districts, to do a bunch of other, and they hired us to do the legal work. But it was a very traditional council manager form of government, with that caveat, which made it easier to get rid of. They contracted for police with the BSO. But actually, I haven't totally kept track of it. For my partner, who's still the city attorney there, they're moving towards a much more traditional model, where they're starting to hire all their people and so forth and so on. So it was unique just because they were contracting everything out, but the form of government was really not unique. And now they really are sort of transitioning to a very typical council manager form of government.
The newest municipality in this part of Florida is the 39th in Palm Beach County, it's Westlake. And of course, that was a developer concocted town. It's now become a town, and they did the same thing, contract out, and they got a very traditional boilerplate council manager. And but for now, as they're growing, that seems to be able to work for them.
In most of the new cities in Dade, when we wrote the charters for them, probably about 10 of them, and even some in Monroe County, they mostly, except you were a council manager form of government. Some of them, like Pinecrest, tweaked it, and they gave some extra power to the mayor. So it was a council manager, but with a stronger mayor. So the mayor had certain authority that was specified in the charter, but it was pretty typical council manager form of government. One thing that wasn't mentioned, just to sort of round out the discussion, is that the articles that talk about a strong mayor form of government talk about a particular person being responsive to the voters. So if things are not happening and there's a manager, you can't get rid of the man. I mean, you have to get the council to get rid of the manager. The voters, on the other hand, if they're not happy with a strong mayor, with the way things are moving, they can directly get rid of the strong mayor. So that's when people talk about the strengths of a strong mayor, that's what they talk about.
Correct. And so, yes, the great power comes with great responsibility, and the mayor, usually in most strong mayor cities, is the target for praise and criticism there. So, and Mr. Weiss actually mentioned something very good here. Keeping a council manager form of government, but giving some extra powers to the mayor, whoever that is at a given point, is always an option. you don't, I mean, you can put in the charter what you want to put in the charter. As long as it doesn't violate Florida law, you can do it. So think about that, you know, saying, well, maybe we just need a little more of this over here with the mayor. And that's always an option.
Well, most of our economic development really grew and our financial strength of the city grew with the mayor and professional manager form of government versus just a commission mayor. And that particular mayor always was very inclusive of his colleagues on everything that he did. So it comes back to the professionalism of how you follow and how you adopt the language of the charter and
It comes
carry
back to
out
the
the
person.
language of the charter.
Unfortunately, it comes back to who is that person. Because if that person is good, professionalism follows. Person's not so good. And that's where it all stands and falls.
And in the past, we used to do national searches. This last time we didn't. There was no search done. It was just Ben's motion and that was it from someone that they liked internally without doing a search based on credentials that prior city managers here always had. So I don't know if that's something within the charter that is there criteria for credentials that need to be addressed or not.
Usually that's in the job description, but if you think you
They
need to
do
put
a
it in a
job
charter, maybe that's
Yeah.
adding an extra layer. Again, and hopefully it would be followed,
Right.
but there's no penalty for that.
Except, us paying for it.
It's not.
Chris, did you have anything? Because we've been through this over the years of looking at the charter back and forth.
I really don't have any questions, but I do have very definite opinions.
Happy to hear it.
Well, I took stock of what was said is there a reason that we need to change? And I think we first have to identify if there is such a reason first, and then decide what changes we need to make in order to implement whatever that change may be. And I'll be candid with you, I don't really know what those pressing issues are that would motivate us to change our form of government. But I'd like to listen.
One thing you pointed out, the mayor of West Palm Beach, just keep using that because this charter is up, it's a topic right now. Strong mayors can change the charter. You don't, they won't convene a committee. They can do it, right? They'll go to the council or commission, and it will be probably voted through. And of course, the only ultimate check is the voters, because the mayor in West Palm is actually proposing 3 different changes on who the kind of person will follow him. And based on some bad election politics that happened when he ran for re-election. And he's allowed to do that. So see, there's something to think about. If power goes over, it might not be able to come back very well.
Which goes back to our last meeting, when Richard, you raised issues where they made the changes to the election laws that were not changes that should have been done by ordinance. So that's really what you're pointing out there, because we're trying to fix what was broken with the last elections because of the action of the last commission who voted on ordinances that really should not have been done by ordinance affecting our elections.
Unless there's a circuit court that would.
I mean,
Would change, one state that might
Yeah.
come in and you hate to have things fixed through that option, because that's.
interesting point. Yes, Jackie.
Chair.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of comments. Number one, your presentation is excellent. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Number two, I was around and very active when we didn't have district commissioners. And I can tell you, when the city commission decided to district, everybody was extremely excited. Usually you have a pretty good commissioner, it doesn't always happen, where they listen to the people in that district. There's always a few people that don't agree, but I've really enjoyed it and I think it works. At the beginning of the meeting, I was taken back with the chair making a comment about us having a substandard or not as good of a city manager. So for the record, I think we have an excellent city manager, and that was her personal opinion, which I don't think is necessarily what you should do in this
Well,
meeting.
I'm glad, but we do have a charter and there are very strict restrictions within the charter on the city manager, which are not being followed. So it brings up the question, once you have that situation, what do you do? So, you know, those are the things you have to, because we never had that before. We never experienced that before. So this is all new to us that have the history.
I'm
To
glad you're
see,
actually
yeah.
sitting working on this.
Same thing.
And your own time here in the late hours on Thursday night doing it. And so
I'd like to have
applaud
a
you
manager
for
that
your-
does
your
live in the
civic
city. Yeah.
mindedness in doing that.
Dr. Cruz, you keep referring to certain powers that are either enumerated for a strong mayor or a mayor with expanded powers. Off the top of my head, I can think of the ability to hire and fire the manager, attorney, and clerk, hire and fire senior staff at a director level, present the budget. What are some of the other enumerated powers that we might want to think of, even if we don't choose to make any of these choices?
Strong mayor. For example, do you want all the commissioners to have to agree to override veto a mayor's action? Or do you want just the majority? Or some majority or 3/4? In West Palm, it was 5, the 5 commissioners have to do it all together. And that's always hard to get. Especially a strong mayor who can obviously punish in various ways if you don't do the right thing. Not that I'm talking about a specific individual, I'm talking, there's always a debate. The fear of retaliation. And I don't want to get this person upset with me, so I go along with him or her until it's just impossible to go along with him. So what is the check on the mayor? A strong mayor? Would it be a veto? And how many people would want to speak about that?
But we're very specific within the charter too, as to what the mayor can or can't do. Unfortunately, certain people haven't really read the charter. And we'll say at a conference agenda, well, that's because the charter says the mayor can do that, but that is not what the charter says. And it's a very frustrating point, knowing.
And of course, to enforce that, it was substantial enough, you have to go to court and try to force the issue. That's very long.
Maybe we just need to make everyone take the course of reading the charter. As they sit down, you know, when you run for judge, you have to take that special training. And you have to sign on accepting the judicial code of ethics. And maybe that's what we're lacking, is not enough education and training of the management and the elected officials. I know it's once a year with the League of Cities, and I know Richard's firm is very involved and Sam Gordon's firm is very involved, but maybe the training needs to be done more often.
Could be. And just to go back to your comment, the model city charter I left with the chair does have, if you're gonna have a strong mayor, these are what is it, a council manager, here are the powers. So they list everyone that they can think of, and you can pick column A or B. So you could refer to that, but those are the big ones that we were just talking about.
Thank you.
Could I just make a request that if you provide materials, that you provide them to our clerk, and that the clerk makes it available to all the committee members, so that.
I already told David.
I was just
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would do that.
she's agreeing. I see what
As
you're
opposed
saying.
to sending them to the chair, which is just gives the impression that, I don't know, whatever, but it's, I know it's not true, but I think it just keeps it.
Yeah, I already told David that I would.
You know, I think that both Ben and Chris have made the same point, which is, you know, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What is, and I really think that that's, we can come up with a lot of solutions, but we have to sort of figure out is there a problem? And what is the problem? And what is the best way to solve? As opposed, and I think maybe we could, I'd like to hear I mean, Judy's articulated some of the problems, but I'd like to hear whether other people think there are problems and that need to be resolved, or, you know, sort of following up on what Ben and Chris said.
You know, you make a good point of the charter changes are tough. If you can fix what people are unhappy with your current form, that would be the ideal way to do it. If it's just impossible to fix, then you could consider more drastic changes.
And Richard, last month when you brought up about the conversation that we needed to have the conversation about strong mayor.
Yeah.
And we started having that last January. We talked about, based on what we went through with the issues, seating the commission and the clarity because of the ill-behaved of those that were there, blocking the elected people from being seated. So back then we started talking about, well, what form? Because they were acting one form, which was inconsistent with the charter and blocking us from having a commission moving forward. And then as we watch the different process coming forward, things that have arisen, especially during the flood, the state of emergency, where the manager would say, well, no, that's the mayor. And it's like, no, that's not the mayor. That's the commission as a whole. That lack of understanding. And, you know, it was very confusing and it was very tough on some of the neighborhoods as well, because they could not get the answers that they needed. Unlike prior professional managers who knew how to do it. I mean, today, as of today, they still have not had a wrap-up session to discuss what happened during the flood and what worked, what didn't work, what vendors worked, what vendors didn't work, et cetera. So it makes everyone start thinking, what is going on with form of government that we're still faulting close to a year later? So
I mean,
it's, yeah.
to me, those kind of comments are very helpful because you're now sort of addressing, you know, what problems we potentially could try to solve.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Mary.
With the last election, and let me just clarify, I'm not from this world of government. This is, you know, I'm looking from Joe Public in. And there were things wrong with the last election. But isn't it more the charter needs to be cleaned up, not the form of government? Because quite frankly, as a civic leader, the thought of a strong mayor, and I like all our commissioners, I like the ones in the past, you know, but the thought of any of them being a strong mayor, even though I like them all, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I think what we have is good. Maybe we don't always have exactly the right people. And maybe the charter isn't correct and it needs to be corrected. But as far as going to the exercise that we're doing now of thinking about the change of government, I think there's better things that we should really be looking at. But that's me, again, not from this world. So that's what I think.
The rules were in the charter, they were just ignored. So the issue was, the charter was very clear. They were ignored. And then the next problem was the prior commission, that say, because he voted on it, they did by ordinance some changes that affected the seating of it with the dates. And it was very confusing, which we then said, that's inconsistent. It's inconsistent with the charter. It's inconsistent with state law. So that's why these conversations are taking place, because it was the management.
I do understand that.
And the manager and the attorney and the commission that put things in place that were inconsistent and did not match the election laws, even though the charter was very clear.
Just Paul, is that accurate what Chair just said about it being inconsistent with state law?
That was the page on the minutes that I was saying that the section was not correct. I pointed out last month that there was a statute that supported what was done.
It was inconsistent with state law. If you remember what Nate Klisberg said, who is the attorney for the supervisor of elections. So, you know, and then Richard brought up at the last meeting as well, if you recall what Richard put on the record, some of the ordinance that you all voted on was not accurate, that should have been incorporated into the charter.
Yeah, you're just
So
getting a
the
different,
charter was correct.
you're just getting a different opinion from the
No.
city attorney. That's it.
Well, and that, but we should have one thing, make sure whatever you do, work very closely with the city attorney. So.
Right.
Mhm. And what's interesting when you talk to the supervisor's office or the county attorney's office, who acts as the attorney for the supervisor's office, their frustration in what was going on here was very overwhelming and was inconsistent. And Chris lived through some of that.
We did, but I think we've already addressed that in some of the recommendations going forward.
To make those changes.
But I agree with what we just heard that. You know, I think, well, personally, I think the form of government we have is satisfactory for us. We just need to look at the charter itself to plug the loopholes. One thing that did arise, it may not be the form of government, but I know recently there's an issue about whether Robert's Rules of Order needs to be followed or not. And we know, at least I've noted, there's nowhere in the charter that talks about that. And maybe we should consider, as the Charter Review Commission, do we want to put that in and adopt Robert's rules? Because if we're not going to follow it, or if we're going to follow it informally, when a member such as a mayor or someone says, well, I don't need to address whatever's on the floor, I'm going to substitute my own motion. I think we need to clarify that. And if we as a Charter Review Commission decides we should have Robert's rules, maybe we should put that in. I would be in favor of that.
Richard, are you familiar with any of the cities having to formally adopt that into the charter? Or is that a policy procedure by the commission?
I don't remember seeing it in a charter, but it frequently is adopted by ordinance or by procedure. Some people use Roberts, and there's another one called Masons. But I do think it's very helpful to have a set of rules that everybody's bound to follow, so they don't change over time.
So just as a question, even though there's no reference to Robert's rules, the city does have rules of parliamentary procedures written, I would imagine.
David, do you want to answer that?
I'll answer that. When it comes, what I can do, and based on the question about adopting the Roberts rules, I can reach out to all the other cities and kind of do a check as to how they adopted, whether by ordinance or, and find out how many of them actually have done it or not.
You can actually find that, I think, on the Florida League of Cities website.
They have it on there as well.
Look there first, it might be a lot simpler.
Even better.
And I know from the county attorney that the county actually doesn't follow Robert's rules, but does have its own standardized form of parliamentary procedure. Those rules are enumerated. I don't think I've ever seen them. But the county attorney is there almost as the final arbiter of, can you do this procedurally? And they are bound by a document. So no, I think that if there is a document in existence,
Nothing has ever been adopted, to my knowledge.
that's interesting.
Right, it's a free for opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, that's how they behave. It's inconsistent. And I think the comment the other night was, no, we don't have that for up here, but when we go back in the law office, the city attorney's office told, we kind of look at from Robert's rules, but that's not what we require you there.
So I would think that it makes sense to at least put something in the charter that requires a standardized, written, enumerated set of parliamentary procedures. I just don't have any partisan affiliation with Masons, Roberts, or anybody else.
Chairman, I'm going to read from the charter, section 3.13. Does say that the commission shall prescribe its own rules, regulations, and order of business, shall keep minutes of the proceedings.
And
But
do
I just heard that there are no formalized, rules, and at this point, I think we need to clarify that.
and Paul, do you know that if they've adopted Robert's rules or not?
I'm not aware that they have.
No, it was discussed the other night in the days.
Because a lot of people use, a lot of cities use a hybrid, you know, they use, say, adopt Robert's rules unless there's a specific city rule to the contrary. Because Robert's rules are very comprehensive, and there's, you know, books written interpreting Robert's rules. So it's a wealth of knowledge that anybody can look at. And it's very helpful for everybody to be, sort of be on the same page. And then cities have special rules, attendance at meetings and how people vote and so forth and so on, that you can add to Robert's rules.
Paul, just as a point of information, does the charter have the word parliamentarian anywhere in it?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm trying to search right now, but I don't. And by the way, since I read that sentence out of section 3.13, it could be done without a charter change.
Yes, it could be done by ordinance.
But if the city's not going to do that, then I think the
Well,
charter should.
but think about this. Anything we recommend can't go to the voters for the voters to make change unless the commission adopts anything. So what we've done in the past is make a recommendation that we think this change needs to be accomplished
That's all that we do in this commission.
and do it as a communication to them that this is something that needs to be adopted. And they nay.
I agree with you, and that would be put before the 5 commissioners, and it'd be interesting to see how the debate will follow.
I am willing to go far enough to say, I will make a motion that we need an amendment to section 3.13. Inserting language that identifies the parliamentarian for the purposes of running the meeting and requires the commission to adopt by ordinance formal rules of parliamentary procedure.
And who are you suggesting for the parliamentarian?
I wasn't. It's probably either the city attorney or the city clerk. I think there needs to be one who has final authority on that and some rules that they have to abide by. I am completely, what's the word, agnostic on how that's adopted past that point.
Who serves in that role in other municipalities and forms of government?
A lot of times it's the mayor, and the mayor makes the procedural calls and then is subject to being overridden by a majority of the council or commission. But I don't recall there being in any city charters where it says the city attorney is the parliamentarian or the clerk is the parliament. But my recollection is in practice, the mayor basically says that motion's out of order. And that is the rule unless it's overridden by a majority of the commission. Parliamentarian actually, you know, is the final authority, and large bodies, and I've done this, have actual parliamentarian people that are very versed in Robert's rules, and that's all they do. But I'm not aware of, I could be wrong, it could be researched, you know, maybe you could check it.
Person in the county who serves that function.
The county attorney.
The chairperson.
Sure, yeah.
So the chair, to answer Ben's question, the county attorney serves as the parliamentarian for the county commission. And again, we don't use Robert's rules per se, but there are rules of parliamentary procedure that are upheld by the county attorney. And permission is, or instruction is solicited pretty often. In a way that, again, I'm kind of taken aback to think that there is a way in which, again, a mayor running a meeting can interpret order sort of on an ad hoc basis. I guess it's worked up until this point, but that seems like an oversight.
Yeah.
It's been an issue. And I want to thank you, Peter, so much for
You
coming.
all, very happy to see you all. And
Thank
bless.
you.
If I can help again, let me know.
Do we want to proceed with that?
So I did have the motion, made on the table that I would like to see an amendment to 3.13. Where the city must identify a parliamentarian. And there should be a reference here to the fact that the parliamentarian needs to enforce the rules of parliamentary procedure to be adopted by ordinance. Second, my chairman.
To the point of discussion. The motion with the second. The question is, do we want to actually you're talking about creating a new position or not creating a new position?
Identifying a holder of a responsibility that needs to be identified and governed by rules that are written and transparent.
Because I would imagine, and we are having a change of city attorneys now, that between the city attorney and the mayor, that those things should be worked out, but I'm open for any.
Excellent. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is the motion that,
It's the way he worded that.
I guess it would be me, I don't know, is the motion to bring back a proposal for you to consider? Or,
On advice of counsel, that's a good idea.
because otherwise I'm not sure.
I will amend my motion to request language to come back that would amend 3.13 and both identify a parliamentarian. And
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted. Do you want to suggest who it should be, or
I think it's either the city
or
attorney
leave
or
it
the
blank
city
and we'll
clerk.
decide later?
Again, that's for the commission to decide. I think it's again, either one of two roles that already exist, but however they want to use that. But also that parliamentarian must uphold rules of parliamentary procedure to be adopted by ordinance.
All in favor?
Well, just want to, and you seconded that?
Yes, friendly.
Okay, I didn't hear, okay, yeah, all in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, thank you.
And by the way, for a point of clarity on the elections, and Nate has surgery, but he's happy to come back to future. Part of the inconsistency was the ordinance that you did was to seat the commission 1 week after the election, prior to the votes being certified, which is inconsistent with state law. Then, once the votes were certified, this commission refused to call a meeting together in order to seat the commission that was certified by the elections, inconsistent with state law. So Nate would be happy to come back. I know future meetings because he's offered that, but yes, inconsistent with state law. Okay, so now we are on additional public input for the strong mayor versus other forms of government. I really think that that's something that needs to be presented back to the Council of Civic Association to see. You may find that there are people that have those questions and might throw some comments back to bring back to us to the next meeting.
I could do it in November.
Be great.
Who would be the one that would talk about it? The same man that was
I
just,
think Peter would be happy to come if you want him to.
I think that would be good because, he's not from the city and,
Right, he's academic.
okay. So I don't have his contact info. If you could.
I can give it to you, Mary.
Okay,
I'll
all
send
right,
it to you now,
okay,
and I can do the introduction. I'll do that now.
okay. And that meeting, just so you know, is November 14th.
I'm sure what I was also suggesting is that we find a a city manager, well-respected city manager to come and talk about that, and also a well-respected, strong mayor to come and talk about that, so that we could get an idea from people on the ground as to how they view what they have.
Richard, what would be interesting is, do we want to take a city manager from within Broward and take a mayor from, say, Dade, so we have different
I don't think-
aspects?
Yeah, I don't really think in Dade. I mean, it's plenty of managers in Dade. There are some hybrid stronger mayors in Dade. But they're hybrids. They're not pure strong mayors. Maybe Hialeah has a pure strong mayor, but I'm not sure. But they're Broward, I guess, Plantation has a pure strong mayor, right?
Right, yeah.
So
Nick
I
just elected-
have, I've listened to this a lot, but I thought it might be beneficial for the committee and the public to hear what people have to say about this. More input about it.
And Richard, it's funny, I was thinking of Charlie Dodge being the longest serving manager, and what he's created down there in Pines is an interesting perspective. But there may be other managers that may be, because Charlie's been there for so long, that maybe there are some that more middle of the road with newer concepts that should speak. Do you want to take up that portion? I took the academy. Would you like to take the portion of helping select the
Okay, I'll do that.
speakers?
I'll ask two, and I will tell the committee that I don't have any particular preference at this point about this. So I'll try to pick people that are sort of a little bit academically oriented, but are working in those jobs now.
Great,
I'll do that.
thank you.
And are you talking about for the council meeting for the city of Fort Lauderdale?
No, he's talking about back to us.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Get back to us.
Okay,
us
thank you.
For more input.
No, you're talking. Go ahead, Richard.
No, I was just talking so the public could also hear it.
That was gonna be the question. Is this going to be when we go on the road to have this, or is this just amongst ourselves?
I think for what Richard wants to do, it comes back to us first.
Yeah,
And then we do.
Chris, I think people who are interested, I don't know, I'm not sure that we have a very high Nielsen rating, but I assume some people watch it. But those people, I think, that are really interested in this, they do watch it or will watch it, because I'm sure it's archived. So I was thinking that this is a way to do that.
Okay, I was just curious. I didn't know.
That's what I was thinking.
Richard, on the next portion of the agenda, Charter Revision Board discussion changes Articles 3 and 4 as needed. Do you want to lead off on that? As to,
I mean, the question is, where do we want to go here for this? Whether we want to, I mean, clearly, we're not making any decisions on the form of government at this point. I mean, I guess we need more conversation about that. And then we have to reach some sort of consensus on whether we're thinking about a change or not, or whether the problems that whether the problems that have come up that Judy, you've articulated, and others can be need a charter change, or in the form of government, or whether they need to be other sections of the charter, or both changed.
well, one of the purposes that we got into last week, and you got the definition put in here, was the residence and domicile. And I think that at least is warranted a discussion, because that affects both sections.
Yeah.
It affects the elected officials and affects the officers of the city manager. And if you want to proceed, was it you or Paul that pulled
I
in
think
that case?
Paul's been doing a lot of work in between meetings, and maybe we should allow him to sort of go over some of the items that he's been working on.
Sure, be glad to. Let me just I'll preface my presentation with explaining how I set these proposals up. So if you look at the redrafted or the proposed ordinance, charter sections that I provided, you'll see that I set out the original from the charter, then I made the changes in the recommendation section, cross outs and underlines, and then I put it all together and as amended incorporates the changes. So each one, actually with the exception of 3.15, because I didn't think it was necessary to get to that later. But that's pretty much how I set it up. And I'll start with 3.03. So you'll see in the second part of the handout that as you requested at the last meeting, I deleted the language or to qualify for nomination or election as such. I inserted that shall be an elector of the city of Fort Lauderdale. I deleted the language about having to be over the age of 21. And I added candidacy at the end of the first paragraph to make it consistent with the second. That was also discussed. So along with that, I looked into the distinction between residence and domicile, because this is the section that says, and shall be a resident of the state of Florida and a citizen of the United States. It also says, it requires the candidate shall have resided in the city of Fort Lauderdale for 6 months immediately preceding the date of the election, shall continuously reside in the city of Fort Lauderdale, and shall be a resident of the state of Florida and a citizen of the United States. So I put together some information about the distinction between residence and domicile, and then you can decide whether you want to recommend any change to that. So,
Well, why don't you talk about that?
yeah, so I gave you an excerpt from some case law from the Supreme Court of Florida. And there is a difference between domicile and residence. They're not synonymous. So if you look at the excerpt from Minnick versus Minnick, you'll see in the second paragraph, there's a discussion. I'm going to jump down. I don't want to hear me read all this, but I will jump down to the bottom of the first page, which is in a nutshell.
Oh, why don't you try to, just in your own words, try to explain to us what you found to be the difference?
Well, domicile is more permanent. Domicile is pretty much permanent residence. That's basically what it is. So you could have a domicile with an intent to live and permanently reside somewhere, but you could also have, someone could also have other residences. So basically domicile is where you plan to return, and it's your permanent residence. And that is also consistent with a few statutes that I provided in connection with homestead. With the homestead exemption, there's a provision of how permanent residency is determined. That's in 196.05. I'm giving you a copy. And the homestead statute uses the term permanent residence. I also gave you section 222.17, which explains. I guess this would more apply to someone who's new to the state, how to go ahead and manifest and evidence domicile in Florida by recording by filing with the office of the clerk a sworn statement showing residence. So there's
what is the difference between permanent residence and domicile?
I don't know that there is one. I think it's a matter of terminology. From
Okay,
what I could tell.
what are you suggesting should be the correct language in the charter for this?
I would probably tie it to permanent residence. Domicile, I also understand, is used in domestic relations. more than kind of commonly. So probably permanent residents.
Okay,
So the language in the charter says shall reside in the city during a term of office. And shall serve the city on a full-time basis. Does that? Based on the language currently in the charter. So would that interpretation be full-time residency?
Well, what I found though is you could have temporary residences elsewhere, so it's.
Yeah, you have temporary residency.
So it's a matter of, is that where you're planning to return?
That's always been the law, and includes your voter registration, includes your auto registration, and your. It's a very clear charter language we have says shall reside in the city and shall serve the city on a full-time basis. So what best fits that description?
I didn't really look at, we're talking about Article 4.
Well,
Right.
it's three and four, yeah.
You might want a distinction between 3 and 4. I don't know. Between,
We never had the issue before until now. So now that we have an issue, how do we make sure it's clear that no one can misrepresent and misunderstand or misstate the.
you're catching me a little off guard on Article 4 because. I mean. Article 4 is the other officers. Article 3 is commissioners.
But it should all be the same.
Well, should it?
It should be the same.
And I
Is there a
guess,
difference? It's never been utilized differently. So how do we guarantee that it gets utilized consistently?
well, I would say. Clarifying with permanent. Would help. I mean, permanent residence is used in the statutes. It's the standard for the homestead exemption. Reside could mean temporarily, could mean that there are different residences and other
But
residences.
the word is shall, not may. And shall was always the standard.
Right, but it's. Adding permanence to the language will,
all right, so you're suggesting that we use the word term permanent residence, yes?
yes,
Okay. Discussion about that? Do people feel comfortable with that?
For city manager and for commissioners, Chair?
Yeah, of
Is that what
course.
it's-
Okay, and
That's always the way it's been.
Yeah.
Yes, Jackie.
Great.
When you say permanent manager, then you start trying to tie it to homestead. A lot of these young people nowadays don't want to buy places. They want to rent long-term.
No one's saying.
Are you,
That's-
are you,
no,
well, you
absolutely
can't
not.
tie it to homestead
We've
is my
never done
point.
it tied to homestead.
I give that as an example.
Okay,
Because there's a statute that explains what is permanent residence.
so you could have a permanent residence and you could have 3 other residences. It's the one you call permanent.
Correct.
Well, the issue has been, we have never had an issue in the city ever before of a manager that did not live full-time in our city. It's always
Okay,
been.
that's
And
not a proven
and so-
thing, Judy, so stop.
But the question is, the charter is very clear. However, if you don't follow the charter and you're making your own interpretation, how do we make sure that the charter is followed with enforcement if they're not educated enough to be able to read the charter and understand it? I mean, that's the issue.
Yeah, I think if you have permanent residence, there's lots of cases that talk about that, and it's not any one factor. It's your driver's license, it's your voter's registration, it's utility
Correct.
bills, it's all of that. And I think the answer with respect to the commissioners is, that goes to court. The answer with respect to the manager is that If his bosses are concerned, or he or her bosses are concerned that he or she is not a permanent resident of the city, well, then his bosses should take care of that. That's the elected officials.
And they have a responsibility, again, upholding the charter.
Correct. That's right.
Can I ask, but currently, when I read this, you could have a house in Timbuktu and an apartment with a year-long lease or whatever in Fort Lauderdale and be a city manager.
Yes, you can. No
Okay.
problems with that, as long as your voter registration and your auto registration and your mail and all the intent, which is what the legal standards are that provides presence. Because
Right.
that's the key word.
Yeah, what happens
But is that,
it's very fact specific. The courts, there's not one thing that says, oh, I'm a permanent resident. The courts look at the evidence presented and voters registration, driver's license, utility bill, where your kids go to school, all of that shows your intent, and it's very fact specific. Every case is different, but the courts look and say, okay, is this where this person makes their primary permanent residence? The fact that they have a vacation home in North Carolina doesn't
We don't
change.
care.
It doesn't change that. The fact that they go away for a month, it doesn't change. Where is their permanent residence? That's what the courts look at. And we can't, and because there's not one specific thing where you can say, okay, this is it. You have to use a term that Paul suggested, like permanent residence. And the courts, and if there's an issue, the courts will look at it, or the commission will look at it if they're dissatisfied with where the manager is living.
Great, so I'll make a motion to adopt term permanent residence for commissioners, mayor, city manager.
Second,
I have to speak against this. I don't really see the need for the city manager or any of the other appointed officials to be permanent residents. I think reside is more than adequate. I think that permanent resident is a decent standard for the electeds. Because again, I think you want to represent the vast majority of residents. But as I'm looking at section 4.05, we're not expecting a city manager at the point of appointment to necessarily be a resident, obviously.
Correct.
And so again, it feels like a weird, unnecessary addition that might create more ambiguity than solve.
Ben, if you don't mind, Ben, could we bifurcate your motion? And let's take the elected officials first and see if we have consensus on adding that. Is
Sure.
that right?
Yep, that's fine. So I'll amend my motion.
could you also amend it that it's within that 6-month permanent residence, 6 months prior to candidacy?
Yep,
Is that acceptable?
prior to, is it candidacy or election?
I'm suggesting candidacy.
Yep, yeah, that's fine.
that's fun.
And is it also included in your motion that you want something brought back to you to look at next meeting? Is that what?
Yes.
Yeah, Paul, every time we adopt something like this, we're fooling around. At the next meeting, there should be a final version of what we've adopted coming back to us. And then it should go on, and we should vote on it again with the language in front of us. And that will go on a pile as a recommendation to the commission. Of course, we can always change our minds, but that's sort of a temporary recommendation. Always come back to us.
Yep. So again,
So-
go ahead.
Harrison, on the thoughts on the city manager, based on the charter.
Judy, can we just stop for a second? Let's take a vote on this bifurcated part and adding what Chris added to what Ben said, 6 months prior to qualifications and using the term permanent residence. And that's been moved and I second it. So we could just vote on that and get it done.
Or we have to support that.
I had it as Sorensen moved it and Mr. Curry seconded. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
So then Ben has another second motion on the floor to discuss whether we should be adding the residency or continue with the residency or adding the residency requirement with respect to staff. And so I'll second that for the purposes of discussion. So let's have a discussion about it.
So currently, and Kat, I don't know what your employment contract says,
I mean, I don't have to live in the city.
I believe only the city manager is the one that's required to live in the city on a full-time basis.
That's
It's
what
the
I
way the
understand.
charter reads.
Joni Armstrong Coffey referred to her residence in Fort Lauderdale as her pied a terre. And her permanent residence was with Kendall down in Miami-Dade. I don't think it made her any less of a county attorney or any less loyal to the county of Broward. I think that resident is a perfectly adequate standard, not even really sure that we need that.
So, but the question is of that, where is the person spending their nights? Because that's the issue here. In the charter, right now, the governing charter requires you shall reside in the city during the term, and you shall serve the city on a full-time basis.
I think that should be removed. I don't understand what difference that makes. I understand that it's there, but I honestly think that that is a odd, unnecessary standard.
Chris?
As for the city manager, I think it's a matter of commitment.
Mhm.
And if he is going to be the manager of the city, I think he needs to make the commitment that I want to live here as well. And I don't think resident satisfies that, because that's a commitment. So,
Such as during the flood.
well, and other reasons, but, if you're not committed to move to the city after you've been appointed and become a permanent resident here, then I think, as I say, that just lacks that commitment that we need. Someone who's here, the neighbors know where he is, and he's involved, rather than he goes home at night to somewhere else. My personal view.
Yes, Mary.
I think that if that phrase stays in there and we make it even more permanent resident, we're gonna hobble the city as to who they can hire. Now you've got like some great person in a neighboring city in Broward County or somewhere nearby where they live, their wife works there, their kids go to school there. And now for them to be like the city manager, they're gonna have to uproot everybody at a point and come work in the city. And I'm not saying that that would happen, but now we're hobbling, any opportunity for a great city manager that could come from somewhere else where they could commute.
Well, we've had, prior to this, we always had national searches, and this was always the language. It is in their employment contracts, and it's never been an issue prior to now. So it's never hindered us from any search or any applicant because they go into it with their eyes wide open.
I've
So,
hired thousands of people,
but
thousands, and we would never have hobbled ourselves with such a rule. Never.
But your responsibilities of the jobs that you had, it's not to the degree of what management for a municipality is.
I think when you work for the Seminole Tribe of Florida and their government, it's pretty close.
I'm very familiar with, the Seminole tribe. And we're, probably Harrison is close too, based on the jurisdictional.
Well, that's my take on it. You're hobbling yourself with a rule that I don't think is
Well, It's
necessary.
amazing how it never hobbled us before getting applicants and searches here. Jackie,
I just feel like we're going over something because
because
the
someone.
elephant in the
violated terms
room
of the
is,
charter.
we have a problem going on. And I, I don't know, I don't understand this whole discussion as it relates to how this is being handled. I agree with what Mary said.
Mhm.
And I think it's absurd. I
Well,
agree
I
with
just-
what Mary and Harrison both said.
I just find when residents have catastrophes in the night, they want to know where their manager is. They want to know, which is why we never had an issue in any prior time.
But we're such a technology-driven society now. Things have changed tremendously. It's not like a person can't be in contact extremely fast. I mean, I just think that we're trying to
That's
micromanage
great.
that, and I
That's
think it's
great for
wrong.
the staff.
Yeah, I mean,
Chris,
but the argument that you're making is well, we can have a remote city manager who can conduct all of his business on Zoom. There's no reason for him to be here. And I disagree. I think someone who's going to be the city manager, if there's a call in the middle of the night and someone needs him to come down to City Hall, if we had a City Hall, you know, that yes, he can get in the car in 5 minutes, he'll be here. If he's living in Dade County, you know, I just don't see, you know, if you want to commit to the city, you want to be that man who's going to run all of the offices, who's going to be the central effect, the CEO, I think he needs to be here and make that commitment.
I believe he's here. That's what I don't understand why you guys keep saying this.
And again,
But this is for a charter. This is in the future.
Okay.
This is looking for what the
Okay,
requirement
so
is.
you're
Nothing
not
to
saying
do
it's
with
not
today.
happening now. I got
no,
you.
well, what we're
Thanks,
saying
Chris.
today is it is in the charter, it is in the employment contract. And it always has been followed when they did do searches, it was always put in those searches because you have to abide by the charter.
But does a current city manager not have a residence at the city?
He does have a residence in the
He
city.
doesn't have a residence in the city.
He
So
does
every
have a
night he
residence in
drives
the
out of the
city.
city, he goes somewhere else.
He has a residence in the city.
Where, Jackie?
I'm not going to divulge to you especially,
Oh, but I think I know, so
Oh,
and you should have asked.
public
the question.
records.
I believe I know
Very
where it is too. So I'm just confused.
Yeah, I'm aware as well that he lives in the city, so and this is
Why-
a little bit of an inappropriate
Yeah,
conversation.
I'm not talking about
It's-
anything
let's-
current.
let's
talking
Talk
about
about the charter.
the
Yeah.
charter.
So let's talk
So,
about the charter.
I
Let's
agree
talk
with-
about the charter, the fact it's in the charter. You nominated him, he accepted, you
Yes.
gave him a contract, employment
Yes.
contract. The employment contract made a requirement
Yes,
to
to live in the
live with the
city,
charter.
and he lives in the city. He currently lives in the city.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think,
Yeah.
so going forward, Chris, I agree with you. I think it's actually important that the city manager, as the current one does and future ones, should live in the city. I think, to me, it's an investment. This means uprooting a family. And this means moving, if she has to move into the city and uproot, her husband has to leave a job to do that. That's just part of the commitment. And so I think I agree with Mary that it does limit the pool. I think it does. And I think that's okay to narrow the pool to the commitment and the investment to being close by.
I will just simply reiterate that other than the comment that during a state of emergency, where I think that there is more merit to the comments about permanent residence, that again, from just public records, vote builder, city manager lives in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah. When did he take that residence?
Okay, let's
I
not
think we're
debate. the city.
kind of off topic.
No, but but it's a factor of what has transpired. Because when you look at many of these issues, we dealt with charter review for years and never had to address them before. And now we're having to address issues that we never did based on just actions within the last couple of years. And it's very unfortunate that you have a charter. Do people understand what the charter means and what do they accept?
But to the point of the actual discussion, if we talk about the notion of a nationwide search, which I think is a great tool, I don't necessarily think that it needs to be mandated here in this document. But we are anticipating that as a world-class city, as a place that the best talent would want to work, that we are looking beyond just the borders of the municipality. We expect them to move here and be here full time. And to your point of where is this person at night? My answer is at work. So long as that's the case, I don't really care if they are taking their time and moving their children from out of state. I think that's a very weird and antiquated notion to have in a charter. I think it is, as a matter of practice, more likely than not going to be the case moving forward. And I think we're driving for a solution in search of a problem. And if I were to, again, suggest anything, I need to remove that language completely from 405.
Can I call a question, Madam Chair? Or-
No. Just going back to the conversation.
Because I'm not sure that we even had a motion.
I moved.
Oh,
I moved, I bifurcated it.
okay, bifurcated, but I mean, what is
But the
the motion?
The motion is for the city manager, Chair, for the city manager, to have permanent residency in the city.
In the city of Fulton. Okay.
Okay, I would
That's
start
already
with that.
when we.
I believe Richard already seconded it.
Okay.
Is that correct, Richard?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Richard?
I agree with Harrison on this one. I feel like if you have a requirement, are we freezing out?
Yeah, you froze for a second.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You're
I
back.
agree with Harrison on this. I feel like if you have a requirement that they have to live in South Florida, so that they are available to come in. But I am concerned about a really great city manager who has children in Miami Lakes, right across the border, and their kids are in school, and missing a really great manager candidate because she lives right across the border. And so I'm going to vote no on this.
So I'll post,
Yeah.
pass 3-2.
3-2.
Okay, what's next, Paul?
One moment, just write it down.
And Paul, just to be clear, so on these things that we're voting on, you're going to bring them back in final form next time, exactly the way they're going to go to the commission, right?
Well, that's the goal.
Do it.
Pardon?
That's the goal.
That's the what?
That's the goal.
That's the goal, he said.
Oh, that's the goal. Okay. Right.
It depends on you. Okay. Well, the next one is 3.08. Let me just get my notes out. Yeah, got it. Okay, so you asked me to take a look at 3.08 and 6.06 and forfeiture of office. So 3.08 is under Article 3, which is government of city and form of government. 6.06 is in Article 6, which is the civil service system. 3.08 provides for forfeiture of office for conviction of a felony and also forfeiture of office for violating section 6.06. 6.06 talks about removal, but more specifically, it provides that directing appointment or removal of employees is grounds for removal. However, there does not seem to be any mechanism for the removal or forfeiture. So forfeiture sounds self-executing, but that's only if the person is willing to go. So as a practical matter, it probably isn't self-executing. I found a couple of examples of, for example, a couple of other cities, Deerfield Beach, if you're interested. The commission shall be the judge of election qualifications and of the grounds for forfeiture of their office. I don't, as far as I know, as far as I can tell, and I've read this charter a lot, we don't have anything like that. So Deerfield Beach has that, Hallandale Beach has this by ordinance, albeit by ordinance. The commission may punish its members for non-attendance, disorderly conduct, or violations of the protocol manual, and four-fifths of its members concurring may expel a member for non-attendance or for improper conduct in office. So those are just a couple of examples in the county. I've provided a copy of section 112.51 Florida statutes, which provides for suspension and removal by the governor. So suspension for malfeasance, misfeasance, neglect of duty, habitual drunkenness, incompetence, or permanent inability to perform official duties. And also for being arrested for a felony or misdemeanor related to the duties of office, or being charged with a federal felony or misdemeanor, or a state felony or misdemeanor. It also provides for removal by the governor for conviction of any of those charges for which the person was suspended. If you take a look at 3.08 that I provided, you'll see in the margin that section of the statute with a few paragraphs highlighted. I left forfeiture for now, meanwhile, for the discussion, but I did add suspension or removal by the governor as provided by law. See that in the middle of the page. In section 6.06, what I did was I added the word misfeasant. If you look at the middle of the second paragraph on the handout for 6.06, so you'll see that any violation of the provisions of this section, this is from the civil service system. Any violation of provision of this section by a member of the city commission shall be considered misfeasance in office. And I put that in there to tie it into the state statute and grounds for an appropriate judicial remedy or a request that the governor of the state of Florida suspend such member pursuant to section 112.51. Now, who would make that request? That's something for discussion if you want to go in this direction. So there's really it's not an easy solution to this. I've seen some charters in which the city commission is the adjudicating authority. I don't know if you want to go in that direction, but you tell me what you want to do. I also came up with the definitions of misfeasance and malfeasance, albeit out of the dictionary if you want to.
I would hesitate to put the commission on the seat to be the one to adjudicate whether you're going to forfeit someone's right to sit. I think that gets very political, and I think it gets away from an objective view. I would say that we leave it to the courts or the governor. And I saw where it was written in one of these where it was a judicial or the governor, which means if someone feels strongly enough, they can bring that before court with a writ of prohibition or some other legal device to enact that. But I think it'd be catastrophic if we allow the commission to rule on their own members.
Which has been the problem in the past.
And then, Chair, I think I agree with that. I think also my concern is with the governor that it could equally get political. That's where we've
Well,
seen. We've seen some, so that's a major.
But the
concern.
governor has the authority anyway. I mean.
Right.
Right, it doesn't matter because they have the power and the right.
Judy, what has been the problem in the past? You said that's been the problem in the past. What is the problem in the past?
Where it's been up to the commission to decide whether or not to investigate or review or remove people from office. And that's unilaterally through this county in various cities. Where if you take it to the courts, and again, we had that actually with the election when they were trying to say that they could make the determination whether someone should be seated or not, even though they were elected. And we said back then, we should just turn it over to the courts.
Yeah, I see this as a parallel circumstance to the one we discussed towards our beginning meetings where we have taken the commission out of the evaluation process in terms of, the elections. And I think it's a good idea to take them out of this process. Since there is a ability for the governor to take a recommendation, there's nothing that prohibits the commission, if they feel like they want to make a recommendation to the governor, but it doesn't need to be in the charter. They're just another, just like any person can make a recommendation, the commission can make a recommendation. So I think that I'm with Chris on this. I think we should remove the commission in terms of trying to evaluate the activities of the
All
town.
investigation should be outside.
Madam Chair, there's one caveat I want to add, because the grounds for the governor to suspend, which, as I said, were malfeasance, misfeasance, neglect of duty, habitual drunkenness, incompetence, or inability to perform official duties. I didn't see anywhere in the statute where that can result in a removal. So I'm not sure what happens after suspension. Now, conviction of crime, or being charged with a crime and then being convicted, the statute has a provision for the removal by the governor. I didn't see that as to those grounds.
The governor
Just suspension.
removes you once allegations are made. He doesn't wait to see if you're convicted.
Suspension, that's what I'm drawing a distinction between suspension and
Removing.
So for the non-criminal reasons, misfeasance, malfeasance, which is not necessarily criminal, I didn't see removal. So I don't know what happens at the end of the suspension, if it's a specific period of time, and then the person goes back. I'm not sure what happens with a suspension for those reasons.
Actually, we have plenty of cases to refer to in other cities. At the point of an elected being charged with a crime, the beginning of the suspension, if and when they are acquitted on those charges, they are restored to office, basically ending the suspension and removing the interim office.
Yeah, that's in the statute. What I'm talking about is the non-criminal reasons for suspension. That's what I'm having trouble with. So
They're amazingly subjective. Malfeasance, misfeasance, anything. Or you could argue,
How much drunkenness is a bitch?
right, exactly.
Put some specifics to the definition.
But there's case law on that.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they use it all the time.
So I added, as I say, I added misfeasance to 6.06 and grounds for
Says that there's no
judicial remedy or request of the governor.
Or substantially drunk. So.
I'm really fine to have the charter be silent about this and let the governor have whatever power he has. And, governed by the statute and the case law, as Harrison pointed out, and keep the commission out of it.
I think that's really key, is keeping the commission out of making the determination and leaving it to the courts.
Right, but the governor will not get involved in all cases, and that's why I think there needs to be a judicial remedy. Because locally, we're not going to go to the governor and say, well, this commissioner is becoming involved with directing employees of the city, telling them what to do. I mean, we need to have some local, I think.
Yeah, or even,
I think if you're suggesting that the courts have some authority here too, I'm fine with that. I'm just not happy with the commission being involved. The courts.
Oh, I agree with that, yeah.
the commission needs to be removed out, but it needs to be left to the courts. I mean, we have that on, say, P and Z board, someone not disclosing that they have a business arrangement with someone who appears before them. That's an issue. Let the courts decide that issue. Shouldn't be anyone else.
No, I agreed in the beginning that the commission should be out of it. I just wanted to make sure that when Richard was talking about leaving it to the governor, that we had a local remedy as well. Outside the commission.
You're right.
And I
agree with you.
I think I have a way of marrying these two ideas. And Paul, I don't know if this is legally workable, but in what we have for 606 on the sheet, instead of request that the governor of the state of Florida suspend such member, we should say, or suspension by the governor of the state of Florida.
The problem with that is I don't know that we can tell the governor what to do.
But it is grounds for, as opposed to the commission, because again, this is what I'm reading. I believe that the word request,
Right, but the governor is the one who's gonna be determining whether it's one of these things.
But someone has to bring it to the governor's attention, and that would be the request.
But does that need to be in the charter, or can it just, can it just, if the commission decides to pass a resolution urging the governor to do whatever they want it to do, then they can do it? So I'm not sure that there needs to be any language in the charter about this at all.
Just think resolution needs to go to the courts.
So what would, if I may, Madam Chair?
Just have resolution go to the courts. If the courts are making a finding, then that will automatically get sent up to the governor's office anyhow.
What would you want to do with the forfeit language that I left, and that highlighted in 3.08 in the middle? I highlighted that to provide what the statute says.
I think that's fine.
Well, but it's not really so, I mean, it looks like it's self-executing, but the mechanics of it would be through the governor's office.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with this based on conviction.
Okay.
The item, though, that I think that we do need before tonight runs out, because we are running out of time, is the discussion on the referendum with petitions.
That'll probably take a while.
You think?
I think the way that it is.
You want to have a separate conversation next month on that?
Yes.
So
why don't we
some-
start with that next time?
I
I think that one's very key.
Yeah, it is, and it's the way that it's currently worded, I have a lot of issues with and would like to talk about all of the variants. Because it combined multiple sections into this 315, 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
So,
And there's also oath of office.
Yeah.
That I also would.
And if it's all right with you, I'm going to flip the agenda around just so we have some continuity. I'm going to start off with follow-ups from the city attorney, so that we look at the language of things that we've already adopted tonight, make sure they're done, make sure that we agree with whatever Paul has done, which I'm sure we will. And then, so we're done with those things, and then move on to new stuff, but finish up on what we've done so we can actually, check it, give me some feeling that we're checking off some items and putting them in the finish column. And if that's all right with you, as opposed to starting with new things at the beginning of the meeting, is that all right?
Well, I thought that was under the old business, because we did have that discussion, but I'm looking at the time and saying, you want to roll over some of the old business
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
that's fine.
yeah, I think 315 requires fresh pen.
Because 315 was where we originally were going to start tonight, so.
If we could start next time, that'd be great.
Right, Richard, do you need a second?
Yep.
Good, start with 315.
Yeah,
So you want to start with that before reviewing what we've done tonight? Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay.
you mean at the next meeting?
for the next meeting, if Jania, staff liaison. So yes, so Mr. Weiss, so our discussion for next meeting will begin with 315.
Right, and then after that, we're going to put reviewing
just do the
what
cleanup.
Paul has drafted that we've already adopted. Okay.
To clean up, yeah.
Did 309. Oath of office.
Of the office, you want to do that one quick, right?
Yeah, why don't we do that?
All right, that's a quick.
309.
I don't know.
I mean, 309 is basically,
I just so you can see what we're talking about.
I provided a copy of the special act of the legislature that governs Broward County municipal elections. And if you jump to, let me just pull that out myself. If you jump to, toward the end, the most recent version of it, which is chapter 2012-253, you'll see in section 4 that, the legislature contemplated taking office within 14 days after the general election, with the specific day to be decided by local ordinance. What I've proposed is, if you look at 3.09, the middle one, on the first regular meeting day within 14 days after a regular election following, but I added the caveat following certification by the supervisor of elections. But if it's not certified by then on the first regular meeting day following certification. If that makes sense.
Well,
I've also provided examples of what other cities do. So there's a handout. There's a handout with several cities. You'll find it here. Oh, here's my next page, I'm sorry. Okay, so if you look at the handout starting with plantation. So plantation is no later than 48 hours after certification. Deerfield Beach seems silent, except that it cites the state law reference, the uniform election procedure in the special acts. And Florida election law. Parkland says at the first commission meeting following the receipt of the city clerk of the certification of the election results from the canvassing board. Hollywood says during the second regular meeting of the city commission in the November in which the election is held, provided, however, that if the election results are not received by the city clerk by the third calendar day after the election, such persons shall take office on a day not later than 10 calendar days following receipt of the results. It's kind of all over the place. Pembroke Pines is at the first regular commission meeting following certification of the election results pursuant to the Florida Election Code. Why can't we just say that? That seems.
I like that one too. Very simple. Yeah.
which is what we were saying the last time, and that's what Deerfield does, by the way. It's the first commission meeting following the certification.
The way ours is set up, though, is a little more.
Yeah, I know,
It's a little
but-
complicated because we have a meeting for the.
Yeah, but that was
business.
ridiculous.
Well, for the time, for tying up business of the former commission, are you suggesting that come out?
Yeah, what I'm suggesting is that within, which is what we've discussed this since January, that we needed to do is make it consistent. So once the votes are certified, the following commission meeting, you are sworn in.
Exactly.
So you like
That's the right way to do
Pembroke
it.
Pines?
Yeah, it's simple.
Is there a
Forget the
loophole there?
days.
just
I don't know why this commission, I mean, you voted to make it January, then you moved it back to December, and then you did this language, so.
I'm
I
so
don't know
glad
why.
we're here, making it better together.
Yeah, I know,
This is
it's
awesome.
amazing, you know, we're fixing
Teamwork
all,
makes the dream work.
fixing all the errors of the past.
Is there,
Yeah.
is there
Doing
an
it. I'm so
opportunity
happy.
for,
Amazing.
confusion, or is there, because we're saying regular commission meeting, is there an opportunity, how are the regular commission meetings set?
You're concerned about the first and third versus calling a special
No,
meeting.
I'm
believe
concerned
that-
about them not holding a regular commission meeting. I mean, after, I just am trying to close every loophole.
Football.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
so they don't have how are regular commission meetings set?
I believe that is by ordinance, first and third Tuesday of the month. I believe that's in the ordinance, not the charter.
Okay. Right, so they would have to change the ordinance, and they would have to change the ordinance in order to fool around with what Ben has proposed. Okay, so I think that's fine. The first regular commission meeting after certification of the election results. I think that's very clear.
Madam Chair. Normally I don't say anything, but I have to, there's Pryor, Jared Pryor. Normally I don't say anything, but there was just a recent discussion about the definition between a recent or a regular commission meeting and a conference commission meeting, so we might want to clarify that.
But,
Yeah.
but going back to, since the commission is not required to vote on
Yeah.
the seating of the commission, a conference meeting is different
Actually,
versus with the lease. Well, the commission should not be voting
right,
on it.
in
That was
actuality,
the
there's
other
one,
mistake
in actuality,
that
there's
they
one
did.
meeting that begins at 1:30, and the way the
Right.
ordinance is written.
It was 11 o'clock.
Motion, so that's in the charter about tying up business, but the way the ordinance is written, the meeting begins at 1:30, but motions, ordinances, resolutions, maybe a couple of other things, are
Next,
at 6. So it's really technically the same meeting, it's just that they can only take certain action after 6.
what's a voting meeting? One is a non-voting meeting. One is purely for discussion. I just think if we just leave it at the regular. What the concern was that you're raising is that when they did the petition, they were told the next regular meeting, they were forced a non-voting meeting that couldn't be accomplished. Chris,
Is a solution just saying at the next commission meeting? Would that encompass both?
right,
So take out regular and just say the next
commission meeting.
commission meeting.
Except the only thing that's missing is the special act, the way that's written. It
Special act
says,
has to determine our commission meetings or our conference agenda meetings.
right, but the taking office is within 14 days after the general election with a specific day to be decided by local ordinance.
Right.
So that suggests that it should be within.
Within
So Paul, is that
Right, and
binding
that's
on
what-
us?
That's what, okay, so that goes back to what Nate explained when he was here last month and when he was here last spring. March elections have different certification dates than November elections.
Then you have the overseas ballots. And then-
No, you keep on raising that, but once it's certified, certified. And it's all done state law. So once the Broward County Supervisor of Elections certifies the votes, it's over. So if you make
Paul,
it,
could we
once
say,
it's certified,
the next commission meeting shall be sworn in within 14 days, but no later than the next. Did we pass by that provision in the special act?
That's a hard one to answer.
Well, we need to have an answer.
just call Nate. Get a final response if you want to get the clarification.
As a
Can I ask
practical
this
matter-
question?
Yeah.
Does the city ever go more than 14 days without a
They
commission?
did, by ordinance, they did.
During the summer, we do.
Okay.
No, that's not what he's talking about. When you set the date for January and then you moved the date to December, you went beyond that 14 days that the special act is saying that you should be sworn in within the 14 days. So again, that's where we're saying you were doing ordinances that were not consistent with what the law was that governs us on the elections. So if the special act is saying within the 14 days, the days it should be set within that period, but
Well,
We
why don't
can't
we say the
resolve
next
this
commission
unless we
meeting
know the answer
will be
to that.
longer than.
no longer than, not to exceed
Not to exceed. Yeah.
14 days.
But we shouldn't be doing this because we need an answer to the question, which is, are we bound by that 14-day provision? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then the charter needs to account for it. If the answer is no, then we don't need to worry about it. But we shouldn't mess up the charter just because we don't know the answer to the question today.
And that's why I said, if you call Nate, he'll give you the answer, because Nate's the one that brought to our attention about the special act. So a lot of things that the city was doing was inconsistent. And he
Don't
brought
you
that
think we
forward
need
to us.
an opinion from the city attorney's office, whether we're bound by that provision or not?
I think we just get from Nate, who's the attorney at the county that oversees the elections, and he sees that. You froze.
Breezy.
You're frozen.
I'm frozen. Yeah, we could get it from both. I mean, I would hope that they would agree.
Interesting if they didn't.
Well, I was going to say, since they didn't abide by the special act and state law when they did these ordinances last year, that's why I would go to the source of the governing body, which is the supervisor of elections in Broward County.
I don't know that, Judy, that the supervisor elections in Broward County is the authority as to whether that special act applies or not. Paul, isn't that something that comes up all the time? Doesn't the city attorney's office have an opinion about this?
Richard,
I don't think I've ever opined whether.
the county attorney's office happens to serve as the attorney for the supervisor of elections,
Got it.
and it's the county's Broward Special Act. It's not, I'm not looking at Joe Scott, I'm looking at Nate as the attorney of Drew Meyer's office that oversees it. And he's the one that came to us and said to us that all these issues were inconsistent with the law.
Well, I don't particularly care how it's resolved. I think that we should.
That's why I said, just call him. It's simple. Keep it simple, bring it back to us, say yes, yay or nay. That's what,
That's fine. As long as we have an opinion, that's all.
right?
So I make the motion that we just simplify this to either the next regular meeting or accommodate the special act, whichever you guys determine, and bring us back to language so that we can adopt it next time, one or the other.
And to complicate matters only slightly further, in the special act, the term duly elected municipal officers shall take office within 14 days after the general election. If there's ambiguity, if the election is not certified, then nobody's been duly elected. So again, I think that so long as we have next regular meeting after certification, I can't imagine that we're outside of the law. But I'm not a lawyer.
No, that's why I said, just check with them. And bring closure.
Yeah.
I just don't want to see another repeat of what we went through. It was disgraceful.
Pompano says on the next Tuesday immediately following that election.
Yeah, I know. I go up there. I've been there for theirs. I've been there in Deerfield.
West Park says,
We never had an issue until,
the West Park says immediately after the election.
so, a plantation did that night. Are there any other items?
There's one other. There's one other, and that is.
Made a motion.
Is there a formal motion?
Was it a formal motion that he was making?
To adopt the number of plans.
Yeah, I think so.
And,
Was that a motion?
Yes.
Seconded.
okay, all in favor?
What was the motion?
You want to restate it, Richard?
The motion was to amend the qualification, this oath of office section to state that either at the next regular commission meeting or insert language that if we determine that we're bound by the 14 days accommodates that 14-day requirement. That's the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Then there's 310, this should be quick. Oath of office for new members. So the proposal is as soon as practical following certification of the special election. This way it leaves open the mechanism of taking the oath. So it can be by a judge, it can be a notary, whether it's a ceremony or not. Since it's not tied to a meeting necessarily.
I just think that we need to, instead of this elected at other than, I think all of our elections should have the same requirements based on the special act. That you take your oath of office at that time, going back to what Richard's saying. We were forced to do other choices that we never had to do before. And that's what we want to clean up and not have to go through a repeat.
So combine this with 3.09 or just make it parallel?
I'll make it parallel. You want to just make it combined to make it one? There's no reason that we needed to have separation of elections.
No, I think there actually is a distinction and a difference here. The oath of office, as I understand it, is the piece of paper that you sign. The oath of office ceremony, which usually happens at a swearing in, is separate. The idea of as soon as practical to turn the piece of paper into the supervisor of elections is a completely separate issue. That's about a document.
Right, it's just signing the paper.
Well, and turning it in.
And that's taking the oath. I mean, the what's done in public is ceremonial.
Right, and again, I think that the ceremony and that has everything to do with swearing in. I think that as far as section 310 is concerned, I believe that what we're talking about is turning in a document to the supervisor of elections.
Right, but what I'm saying is we don't have to do it at other than a quadrennial meeting. It's
Oh, I
just
see what
any
you're saying.
election.
No.
Yeah, but what's the difference between,
Because this is to seat a member, not at a regular election, not at a regular.
Yeah, but we should be
Special
doing the same, whether it's a regular election or not.
what's the difference between a non?
That was the other thing. What?
Well, don't forget, this,
You did that all by ordinance, so it's not done by the voters voting on that to change that.
but don't forget that this section currently says that, and this was the source of some of the problem, the commission shall
Yes.
meet to receive such new member.
Yeah, but that's
So I got
ridiculous.
rid of that.
Right, we got rid of that. So why is what's the difference in these two elections? Treat them all the same.
Yeah, why shouldn't it be? I think it should be the same, unless there's a reason for it not to be the same. And I'm not sure, Paul and Harrison, whether the swearing in is actually ceremonial. I'm not clear in my mind as to whether I think you have to take an oath of office. I don't know whether it's that or signing a piece of paper, that's the important act, but normally I wouldn't worry about it, but in light of what happened, I am.
So the way I've seen it is that it's this, I'm sorry, it's the same person, the way I've seen it is that it's the same person administering the oath. So.
So again,
It's not.
After the election in 2020, when my boss was reelected without opposition, she did her oath remotely and I filmed it, but then had to bring the signed piece of paper to the supervisor of elections office, which is why I'm nitpicking on this. I
Well,
think that.
and what we did, right, I know Robert went right over, signed the papers as soon as he came in, and as soon as he won, did his got assigned to his office, and then they had the official swearing in ceremony at the commission a couple of weeks later.
Right.
Problem that we had here, they wouldn't even accept their oaths, so we had judges give them the oath because the vote had been certified. So they were legally elected. But the city attorney's office didn't want to recognize the judge's oath and wouldn't give it to them, wouldn't even give it to them, which was inconsistent. So there's no reason why they can't just,
Yeah.
it's very, trust us, but it's very weird.
But
Never happened before. It was all new experience for all of us.
I crossed out the language about meeting to receive the new member, so.
So Judy, are you suggesting that the two-step process becomes confusing? There just should be one swearing in at the next meeting or within 14 days, and that's it?
That's it.
Because normally what they do is they just, even though Skype made things different, normally they come in, they sign the paper, they get sworn in and they're done. And that's like a clean, not bifurcated, they get sworn in some judge's office, that's craziness.
Well, but we didn't have a choice when
I
you,
know, I get it, but it's not what we
Right.
want.
right, it's not what we want. And again, we never, all the years that we did charter, we never had to address these issues before. So it's fixing all those dumb ordinances that they've done.
But for the purposes of 310, we don't need 310.
No, I don't think you really
Uh,
need it.
Turner, do we have other issues?
Anything else?
There's petition and referendum.
Well, then when we just said we're going to start with the next
Right.
one, on that comparison.
I was just gonna say, because rather than suggesting we completely take out 310, I was just going to recommend that, I like Paul's language, provided that we remove at other than a quadrennial regular election, which would then read, a member elected shall take office upon taking the oath. That's a little weird.
Perfect, yeah.
Of office, yeah,
Yeah.
as soon as practical, following certification of the special election.
I know,
Oh,
but
okay.
doesn't that imply that they could take the oath separately?
Other than that.
At the county, they go in, they sign, the day after the certification, they go in, they sign their oath, and they start getting set up in their office. Then they have their ceremony a few weeks later.
Again, the distinction is that this is.
We're forgetting that,
Right, but we don't,
Not-
then we don't need anything.
right?
Well, I'm wondering, Harrison, whether what you're suggesting is creating confusion because it's like it means that somebody could be a commissioner and nobody could know about it. Because they get sworn in. at the same time in their office.
Well,
Now, I don't think that's good.
no, it was a horrendous, it was
No,
such
I'm
poor
just
government.
saying that by leaving the language in upon signing, that's creating the scenario. I don't think
Correct.
that's good. It doesn't look good for the city. It's horrible for the new elected official. It's bad.
It was bad, it was very bad.
I think it should be one process. Within a certain amount of time, you get sworn in and you assume office, and that's it.
Okay, agreed. That works.
But Jackie,
Before you all adjourned, last week at the end of the meeting, I know Mary Fertig was here. We talked about different things, talked about trying to find a space. It's a little closer to downtown, trying to find a place where it could be live streamed. And so the fire department downtown has the room that they use like for Marine Advisory Board tonight. And this group can meet the third Thursday of every month at the fire
that's very
department.
nice. Well,
The chief told me that they had that accommodation.
that's nice. We'll take it up with the city.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
What did you
See
say?
In person next month.
We'll take up with the city. The city tells us where to go. We'll
Well, I
take up with
know,
the
but
city.
last week you said that we were all brainstorming and nobody could find a place. So now we have a
Yeah,
place
we were
that you
talking
can
about the
meet.
Council of Civic Association.
No.
Meeting's adjourned.
Are we adjourned?
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, my